Hello, folks. Jeez. Let me tell you something. Nobody makes a good set of headphones that'll actually fit my noggin. Well, today we're not going to talk about headphones. Ricky's going to talk about why the music of today don't sound good like Frank Sinatra and Nat King Cole. Yeah, so stay tuned and learn something.
Hello, Richard from budgetguitarist.com. Today we're going to talk about mastering, and we're going to talk about the Loudness War, and I'm going to show you some semi-scientific evidence to conclude that basically, even though we've got outstanding tools for making music right now, a lot of today's biggest artists are coming out with music that sounds terrible. Now you might say, well, now wait a minute, Richard. These songs that I'm hearing, the artists I'm listening to, they don't sound terrible to me. Maybe it's just because you're old. No, we're actually going to look at the science. And we're going to show today how you don't need to make bad sounding music these days. We've got awesome technology to make music sound good. And a lot of big name artists just are not doing it because they're still stuck in the loudness war. So let's talk about the loudness war. Today we're going to talk about why most modern recordings sound bad. So I'm going to talk super briefly about the loudness war. Basically what happened is CDs were introduced in the 80s, and then in the 90s, sound engineers, mastering engineers discovered they can make their music sound louder than everybody else's. And they did this by taking the quietest sounds in the song and increasing them in volume, as you can see in this screenshot. So then the entire song appeared to be louder than the competition. And in the case of pop music and rock and metal, they sort of got away with it. But what it really does is it makes a song sound really harsh. So it's sort of like the equivalent of somebody yelling every sentence at you. After a while, all that volume, There's a link in the description to Matt Mayfield Music's video, and you can see the URL here, but you can click on the link in the description. It's 2 minutes long, and it is the single best example of why making your music super loud is really, really bad. Okay, so here's our method. I imported a whole bunch of tracks into Logic Pro. I took each track and I normalized it. And what that means is that I increased it so that the loudest part of the song would be 0 dB inside of Logic. So by doing this, they're all on a level playing field. So then I took screenshots of the waveforms and the LUFS value for each track. So LUFS stands for Loudness Unit Full Scale. And it's a way of showing apparent loudness. So a LUFS rating gives you an idea of how loud somebody perceives a song to be. The waveforms show the dynamic range, as you will see. And just to be fair, I grabbed LUFS samples around 30 seconds into each song. So let's begin. In the 70s, Steely Dan were considered the high priests of awesome audio quality. So here's a sample from Bad Sneakers. Now, specifically to explain what you're looking at with the waveform on the left here. This is basically the song squeezed together. So in other words, you're looking at probably a third of the song. So instead of stretching it out, basically I've compacted all the songs by the exact same amount because it best demonstrates how loud things were recorded. The white lines represent the left and the right stereo channels. Okay, the blue background is the background. Where you see the spikes, like in the top where the spikes are reaching up and touching the white box that says Steely Dan Bad Sneakers, those are the audio peaks. That would be considered 0, right? That's as loud as the song can go. So you can see most of the lines, they're not all the way up like that. There's a lot of dynamic range in this. And if we look at the LUFS value for this song, it's minus 14.3. Minus 14.3, by the way, is what Spotify is moving to and what a lot of people use as just a good volume level. Did Spotify consult with old Steely Dan recordings? Maybe, I don't know. Now let's move to the 80s and we'll look at another band that was known for exceptional audio, the Alan Parsons Project, and the song Prime Time. Here you can see this is louder than the Steely Dan track, right? But you can still see that a lot of the music in this song, well, it's still underneath that line. It's very loud, but it's not like all those little peaks are touching the ceiling, right? I mean, a lot of them are coming pretty close. And if you look at the LUFS, you can see minus 13.6. This would be perceived as louder than the Steely Dan track. That's the 80s. Let's move into the 90s. Okay, here's the outstanding song Last Plane Out by the band Toy Matinee. If you watch Tim Pierce's channel, famous YouTube guitarist, session player, this was the band that he was in. This is one of my favorite songs by the band. But as you can see, if you look at the peaks, a lot of those peaks are very, very, very close to the ceiling. Now, yeah, this did come out in 1990. So really a lot of songs after this were actually louder. But I would consider this a really good sounding song. And if you look at the LUFS, it's minus 15.2. Very reasonable, very reasonable. Now we're in the aughts, the 2000s. Here's Green Day, American Idiot. And if you know what that song is, you're not surprised by the waveform because it's frantically played at top volume. And you can see how most of the waveform, it's basically like it's almost solid white, but you can see all the little peaks in the song, right? And you can see that most of the peaks are coming pretty close to the ceiling. And then it has a LUFS score of minus 9.5. So this is pretty darn loud. Okay, now here's just a couple of years ago, 3 years ago. This is Keen, Voices in Your Head, another great track. I love this song. But unfortunately, if you look at how this thing was mastered, it's pretty much up against the top of the limiter. Like if 0 dB is the top, it's sitting at just below 0 dB or at 0 dB for almost the entire song. And you can see that in here. It's too loud. I mean, it's really grating if you listen to this song at a really loud volume, or even a reasonably loud volume. With a LUFS of minus 8.9, you can see how loud this song appears to be compared to, say, Steely Dan, Alan Parsons, or even Toy Matinee. Here's another example, Billie Eilish, Bad Guy. You can see the segments of the song here, though, where there is some dynamic range. And so when the song is loud, it's maxed out. But there are sections of the song where it kind of quiets down a little bit. So there are some dynamics in this song, which is good. LUFS minus 10.3. So in 2019, the streaming services, so we're talking Spotify, Apple Music, essentially YouTube, they standardized on perceived loudness. And roughly, if you average it out among all of them, it was about minus 14 LUFS, which is where Steely Dan tracks were. Hooray! What this meant was, oh, your song might sound like it's louder at, minus 8 LUFS, but we're going to decrease the volume of your song down to minus 14. So when we play Steely Dan and then we play Billie Eilish, well, we're going to take the Billie Eilish song, we're going to decrease the volume so that all the music will roughly be perceived around the same volume level. So this essentially should have ended the loudness war. Really, there's no point in slamming the music on the ceiling, right? So this was the end, right? Nope. In 2021, as I make this video, we have a couple of examples here. This is Foo Fighters' Menace into Midnight, which I think is a cool song. I think it's great. But look at it, okay? There are some parts of the song where the maximum sound goes away briefly and then comes right back. This track is mastered so loud that, again, if you play it at a reasonably loud level on speakers, you're going to get ear fatigue. Your ears are going to get tired because it doesn't have enough breaks. Here's Taylor Swift's song, Last Great American Dynasty, another song I think is a really good song. This one's not quite as bad, but you can still see, man, most of the song is slammed up against the ceiling of as loud as it can be, with a LUFS of minus 10.3, and that rhymed, and I didn't mean for it to. let's keep going. Yeah, okay, here is Kings of Leon, Golden Restless Age, which I think is another great song. It's got a LUFS of -8.4 and, oops, okay. This is actually a recording of white noise, which is basically, you can think of it like TV or radio static. That's what white noise sounds like. Let me get the correct one. There we go. So here's Golden Restless Age, and as you can see, it looks very, very similar to white noise. This is because everything is turned up all the way as far as it can be. Now, did the band do this? No. When they recorded it, it probably didn't sound like this. This is probably what the record company did to their album. So it looks kind of like instead of the Loudness War going away, it's gotten worse. Is there any hope? Yes, there is. Also in 2021, the song by Steven Wilson, King Ghost. Steven Wilson, by the way, former lead singer, lead songwriter for the prog rock band Porcupine Tree. We have King Ghost here, and you can see all the dynamic range in this track, and it is a great sounding song. You should go check it out when you're done watching this video. It's so cool, right? And look at the LUFS, -17.2 here. Now again, that's just sort of where I sampled it. In the loudest part of the song, I'm sure it's louder than that. But this really gives me hope. And this just shows me, if you were to play King Ghost next to Kings of Leon's song, right? The Kings of Leon song would be vastly reduced in volume. And everything is slamming the ceiling in that track, whereas this track has dynamic range. This track will sound better. And you won't be suffering from ear fatigue at the end of Steven Wilson's album, whereas at the end of the Kings of Leon album, I can attest to this, my ears felt like they were going to bleed because every song on that album is slammed up against the ceiling. So what have we learned? Big labels are still mastering terrible sounding music with a dynamic range similar to white noise. This causes ear fatigue. It's like taking every instrument in the mix and turning it all the way up. What's the loudest thing in the mix? What's the loudest instrument? All of them. Okay? So we also have streaming services that are compensating for this, and they're lowering the overall volume so that all the tracks are about the same. That means there's no benefit to doing this anymore. I mean, streaming services is where the majority of music listening is headed to. Okay. Smart artists can tell record companies, hey, don't make my music sound like white noise. There's no benefit to it, but there may be some very big benefits from actually having dynamic range. What a concept. And so if you're mastering your own music right now, take a hint from Steely Dan and Steven Wilson and stick some dynamic range in there. Don't slam the limiter. Don't slam the multi-band compressor. Let the music breathe. It's going to sound way better. It's really going to sound way more musical than even the top artists do these days. So there you go. Not your typical video for me to talk about like audio recording and the Loudness War and stuff, but I am in the middle of mastering my new album. And I really want the music to sound good, but I also don't want it to sound dull and lifeless next to, today's releases. Fortunately, it's not going to be any problem at all for me to come up with a mix that's going to sound better than Kings of Leon or the Foo Fighters. I hope that moving forward in the future, at some point in time, somebody's going to figure this out and they're going to say, hey, wait a minute, why don't we make the music sound good? Some artists of today are doing that, as you saw in the video, but too many aren't. Okay, anyway, that's probably good enough. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you again next Friday at 5.